I remember the exact moment I stopped being afraid of my own family. It wasn't during a fight. It wasn't during some dramatic confrontation where I finally found my voice. It was 3 in the morning, and I was standing in my sister's kitchen in the dark, holding a set of keys that didn't belong to me, and I realized I had been holding those keys for almost 20 years without ever once asking who they really opened the door for. My name is Eliza Rains, and I want to tell you about the summer I took a scalpel to everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about blood, and about the kind of debt that can never be paid back with money. It's a story about a building that had been in my mother's family for over 100 years, a building that was supposed to be mine, a building that my sister was about to sell out from under me while I was standing in the same room pretending to be grateful for the scraps she'd thrown my way. It's a story about why I spent that summer digging through the bones of my own history to find a weapon I didn't know existed until I was desperate enough to pull at every loose thread. It's a story about what it means to inherit something that nobody else sees as valuable, and what you do when the people who are supposed to protect you decide you're just the caretaker, the one who stays behind and keeps the lights on while they go off and live their real lives. And it starts, as most of these things do, with a key I wasn't supposed to find and a silence that had been building its way toward me my entire life. My family had a way of making you feel like you were in on the joke, right up until the moment you realized you were the joke. And I didn't see it for a very long time, because I was the one who was always there. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who got a phone call at the end of the night and said, "I'll handle it," while my sister Claire was on a plane to somewhere glamorous with a man who sold luxury real estate in cities I'd only ever seen in movies. That was the arrangement. It had been the arrangement before I was born, I think. My mother and her sister had the same dynamic. The one who stayed, the one who got the praise for leaving, the one who was reliable, and the one who was celebrated. And somewhere along the way, I just accepted my place in that line without ever questioning whether I wanted to stand in it. I worked at the same architectural salvage company my mother had started in the 80s, a place called Timber and Stone that was less of a business and more of a museum dedicated to the parts of old buildings that most people throw away. We sold reclaimed doors, mantels, stained glass, hardware from places that had been torn down to make room for things that would never last as long. I loved that building. I loved the smell of it, the dust and the old wood and the faint metallic tang of iron that had held staircases together for 100 years. I loved the way the light came through the high windows in the afternoon and painted everything gold and rust and shadow. I loved the way you could run your hand along a piece of oak and feel the ghost of the people who had touched it before, the cooks, the children, the old men who'd sat in chairs by fireplaces that no longer existed. That building was my whole life, and I had been told, more than once, that it would be my inheritance. Not in writing, not officially, but in the way that families tell you things that are supposed to be promises, even when they're really just placeholders for someone else's ambition. Claire was the one who left. She was 7 years older than me, and she'd been the golden child since the day she was born, the one who could do no wrong, the one who married a man with money and connections, and a summer home in a place where the air was so clean you could taste it. She had a life that glittered from a distance, and I had a life that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and the quiet satisfaction of restoring something broken. I don't think I ever resented her for that. I think I resented myself for not wanting what she had. I thought that made me weaker somehow, that I preferred the dusty warehouse to the glossy world she'd built. But I didn't realize until much later that the real weakness was believing that those two worlds couldn't occupy the same space, that I couldn't have both the history and the future, that I had to choose one and be grateful for the choice. The first crack in that foundation came the night my mother died. She'd been sick for almost a year, the kind of long, slow illness that gives you time to say goodbye, but also gives you time to say all the things you wish you hadn't said. I was with her at the end, sitting in a chair that was too small for me, holding her hand while she slipped in and out of consciousness. Claire had been there earlier, but she'd had to leave for a business trip to Europe because she couldn't reschedule it, and everyone understood because Claire's life was important in ways that mine was not. I sat with my mother through the last 3 nights, and on the last morning, just before the sun came up, she opened her eyes and looked at me with a clarity that hadn't been there for weeks. She squeezed my hand 3 times, which I didn't understand in the moment. We'd never had a code like that. But she squeezed it like she was trying to tell me something, like she was trying to pass along a message that her voice was too weak to carry. And then she whispered, "The key." That was all she said. The key. I leaned closer and asked her what key, but she was already gone, her eyes still open, looking past me at something I couldn't see. I sat there for a long time holding her hand and trying to understand what she'd meant. I thought it was about the building, maybe something she'd hidden away, some final instruction I was supposed to follow. But I didn't find a key in her things. Not a physical one anyway. I didn't know then that I'd been handed one anyway, a key to a door I hadn't even known existed, and I wouldn't realize it until everything I loved was about to be sold away from me, and I had nowhere else to turn. The reading of the will happened in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and regret, and I sat there while Claire and her husband, a man named Duncan who had a smile that never quite reached his eyes, listened to the lawyer lay out my mother's final wishes. The building was left to both of us equally. 50-50. That was fair enough on paper, but I knew even then what that meant. It meant I would run it and Claire would collect her share and never set foot in the place. It meant I would be the caretaker again, the one who kept the machinery running while the other one took the profits. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was how fast Claire would move to take it all. Within 6 months of my mother's death, Claire had decided that the building was a liability, that it was costing us money we didn't have, that the best thing for both of us was to sell it to a developer who was planning to turn it into condos. She didn't ask me how I felt about that. She told me. She said it was the smart thing to do, the practical thing, the thing that would finally free me from all that dust and obligation, and let me start living my own life. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was rescuing me from a prison I'd built with my own hands. But I didn't feel rescued. I felt erased. I felt like the building, with all its creaking floors and impossible history, was the only place that actually knew who I was, and she was about to tear it down and replace it with something that would never remember my name. I told her no. I told her I couldn't do it, that I'd find a way to buy her out, that I'd take out loans if I had to. She looked at me with something between pity and annoyance and said, "Eliza, there's no way you can afford this. I love you, but you can't even afford to fix the roof. You can't afford to keep this dream alive on your own." And she was right. I couldn't. I had almost nothing saved and timber and stone was barely scraping by. But I had something else, something I hadn't even thought about until that moment. I had a letter that had been sitting in a box under my bed for 15 years, a letter I'd never opened because I was too afraid of what it might say. But now I was staring at the possibility of losing everything, and I realized that fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. I went home that night and I opened that envelope with shaking hands, and what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my mother, and the life I'd been living for the last decade. The letter was from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had died when I was 19. I remembered her only as a quiet woman who spent most of her time in the garden and spoke even less. But in that letter, I found an entirely different version of her. She'd written it a few months before she died, and she'd addressed it to me, not to my mother, not to anyone else. In it, she told me something that I didn't believe at first, something that seemed too impossible to be true. She told me that the building timber and stone occupied wasn't originally my mother's at all. It had been left to my grandmother by her own father, and she had intended to pass it down to me directly, skipping a generation, because she had seen something in me that she didn't see in my mother or my sister. She'd seen the same stubborn loyalty to the past that she had herself, the same reverence for things that outlived the people who made them. The letter was full of legal details I didn't fully understand, mentions of a trust that had been set up in my name when I was born, a trust that had been hidden from me by my own mother because she'd been ashamed of it, or maybe because she'd been trying to protect Claire from the knowledge that I was the real heir to something she'd always assumed was hers. My grandmother had left me the building, the business, and a substantial amount of money that had been quietly growing in an account I didn't even know existed. And my mother had kept it from me. For 15 years, she had let me struggle and scrape and pretend I was fine while she sat on a secret that would have changed everything. I felt my whole world tilt sideways, and I had to sit down on my kitchen floor because my legs had stopped working and I was crying, but I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from anger. A slow, cold anger that had been building inside me my entire life without me ever knowing it was there. My mother had chosen Claire, as she always had. She had chosen the golden child, the one who left, the one who glittered, over the one who stayed and loved the dust and the old wood and the impossible beauty of things that had outlived their purpose. She had chosen to protect that light even after she was gone, and I was left to find the truth in a box under my bed because I had been too afraid to open a letter from the only person in my family who had ever really seen me. I didn't tell anyone about the letter at first. I didn't tell Claire, and I didn't tell Duncan. I needed to know what I was dealing with, and I needed to do it alone. I spent the next 2 weeks pulling every string I could think of, talking to lawyers who specialized in trusts and estates, trying to understand whether my grandmother's intentions had any legal weight or whether my mother's years of secrecy had made them irrelevant. The answer I got was not what I expected. The trust was real. The money was real. The building was legally mine, at least in part, and the part that was mine had been given to me by my grandmother, not by my mother. That meant I had standing to challenge the sale. It meant I could stop Claire's plan in its tracks, but it also meant I would have to destroy the carefully constructed fiction my family had built around itself. I would have to reveal that my mother, the saintly figure we'd all mourned, had been lying to me my entire adult life. I would have to expose the golden child, the beloved sister, the perfect marriage, the perfect life, and show them all for what they really were. And I knew that once I did that, there was no going back. I would be the villain of the story. I would be the bitter one, the jealous one, the one who couldn't let go of the past. I would be everything my family had always whispered about me when they thought I couldn't hear. I stared at the letter for a long time, and I realized something that changed the way I thought about everything. For all those years, I had been waiting for someone to give me permission to fight back. I had been waiting for my mother to see me, for Claire to acknowledge me, for anyone in my family to say, "You matter," and mean it. But that permission was never coming. It had never been coming. The only person who could give me permission to fight for myself was me, and I'd been waiting so long that I'd forgotten I even had that choice. I made up my mind that night. I wasn't going to let them take the building. I wasn't going to let them erase my grandmother's last gift to me. And I wasn't going to do it quietly, the way I'd always done everything else. I was going to make them see me for once, even if it meant they hated me for the rest of their lives. The confrontation happened at a family dinner that Claire had organized at her house, a sprawling modern thing with glass walls and a kitchen that cost more than my entire building. She had invited all the relevant people, my father, a few of my mother's old friends, Duncan's family, a collection of people who had never quite known what to do with me, but had always been polite about it. She wanted to announce the sale of the building in a setting where I couldn't make a scene, where I would be forced to sit and smile and accept it, because that's what the loyal daughter did. I sat at that table, and I watched her pour wine and laugh and touch her husband's arm like she was the happiest woman on earth, and I felt something shift inside me. I felt the old habits falling away, the impulse to be quiet, to be grateful, to make everyone else feel comfortable at my own expense. And when she finally raised her glass and said, "A toast to new beginnings," I put down my fork and I said, "I can't let you sell the building, Claire." The silence was immediate and absolute. She looked at me like I'd just spoken in a language she didn't understand, and Duncan leaned forward with that practiced smile and said, "That's not really your decision, Eliza. It's a partnership, and we both have to act in the best interest of the estate." I reached into my bag, and I pulled out the letter. I folded it open, I laid it on the table, and I told them everything. I told them about my grandmother's trust. I told them about the money that had been hidden from me for 15 years. I told them that the building had never been my mother's to give away, that it had been left to me directly, and that I had the legal documents to prove it. Claire's face did something I had never seen before. It went pale, then red, then pale again, and for a moment she was just a woman, not a force of nature, not a golden child, just a woman who had been caught in a lie she hadn't even known she was part of. She looked at our father, who stared at the tablecloth like it contained the secrets of the universe, and she said, "Did you know about this?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. And in that moment, I saw the whole architecture of our family crumble. The lies, the silences, the careful ways we had all avoided telling each other the truth. My father had known. He had known about my grandmother's intentions, known about the trust, known that my mother had hidden it all, and he had said nothing. He had let me struggle and scrape and live my life believing I was the poor relation, the unfortunate one, the one who had to be grateful for whatever crumbs fell from Claire's table. And he had done it because it was easier than fighting with my mother, easier than standing up for one daughter at the expense of the other. He had chosen the path of least resistance, and I was the one who had paid the price for his silence. I stood up from the table, and I looked around at all those faces, at the shock and the anger and the dawning shame, and I realized that none of them had ever really seen me. They had seen a role, a function, a convenient way to make themselves feel better about their own choices. But they had never seen the woman who was standing in front of them, the woman who had spent her whole life being the helper, the caretaker, the one who stayed. I told them I was done with that. I told them I was going to keep the building, and I was going to run it on my own terms, and if they didn't like it, they could take me to court and see what happened when a judge reviewed the full history of what my mother had done. I told them I wasn't going to be their scapegoat anymore. But what I didn't tell them, what I was saving for later, was that I had already started digging. I'd hired a private investigator, a woman named Vera Hughes, who had a reputation for finding things that people had tried very hard to bury. Vera had started looking into Duncan's business dealings because I had a suspicion that Claire's sudden need to sell the building wasn't just about money. It was about covering something up. And what Vera found over the next few weeks was a pattern of debt and mismanagement so deep and so tangled that it made my head spin. Duncan hadn't just made a few bad investments. He had been bleeding money for years, hiding it from Claire, hiding it from his partners, using the facade of their perfect life to prop up a house of cards that was about to collapse. The sale of the building wasn't about Claire finally doing what was best for both of us. It was about Duncan trying to plug a hole in his own sinking ship before anyone noticed. Claire had no idea. She had trusted him the way she trusted everything, with the confidence of someone who had never been told they were wrong. And I realized, standing in that beautiful glass-walled kitchen with the perfect view of the perfect lawn, that I was looking at a woman who was about to lose everything she had built her entire identity on. Part of me, a part I'm not proud of, felt a flicker of satisfaction at that. I had spent my whole life feeling second best, and now the best was about to fall apart. But the rest of me, the part that remembered the 3 squeezes my mother had given me before she died, felt something more complicated. I saw Claire the way I'd never seen her before. not as an enemy, not as a rival, but as another victim of the same system that had broken me. She had been made into the golden child, and that had been its own kind of prison. She had been trained to believe that her worth was tied to her appearance, her husband, her ability to maintain a facade of perfection, and she had done it so well that she had lost herself in the process. I didn't tell her what I'd found right away. I wanted to. A part of me desperately wanted to lay it all out on the table and watch her world shatter the way mine had been shattered in the conference room with the stale coffee and the sound of her voice telling me I couldn't afford to keep my dream alive. But I remembered something my grandmother had written in that letter, something about how the work of healing always starts with telling the truth, not as a weapon, but as an offering. I didn't entirely understand it at the time, and I don't know if I fully understood it even then, but I knew that using the information to hurt Claire would only make me more like the people who had hurt me. So I went to her alone, a few days later, in the same kitchen where I'd made my stand, and I told her what I'd found out. I showed her the documents, the bank statements, the hidden debts that had been accumulating for years. I showed her the quiet betrayal that had been happening right under her nose, the husband who had been stealing from her and from me and from the memory of a mother who had always wanted the best for both of us. She read through it all in silence, and when she looked up, she wasn't angry. She wasn't offensive. She looked like a woman who had just woken up from a very long dream and realized she didn't know where she was. She said, "I thought he loved me. I thought we were building something together." And I said, "I know. That's the worst part." It wasn't the confrontation I had imagined. It wasn't the moment of triumph where I finally proved that I was better than her, or stronger, or more deserving. It was the moment where two sisters, who had been set against each other by forces they didn't fully understand, finally realized that they had been fighting the wrong battle their whole lives. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, talking in a way we had never talked before, about our mother, about our grandmother, about the ways we had been raised to see each other as rivals instead of allies. And I realized that the real inheritance my grandmother had left me wasn't the building or the money, or even the letter. It was the knowledge that I had the power to choose a different kind of family. A family built on truth instead of performance, on loyalty instead of obligation, on seeing each other instead of seeing through each other. The sale of the building stopped. I used the money from the trust to buy Claire out of her share, which she accepted without argument, and which I offered not out of spite but out of love, because I understood now that she needed to be free of it. She needed to build her own life, a real one, away from the debris of the perfect marriage that had never been perfect at all. She left Duncan a few months later, quietly and without fanfare, and she moved into a small apartment in a part of the city she had never even visited before. I saw her more in those months than I had in the previous decade, and I saw something emerging that I had never seen before. A real person, not a performance, not a role. Someone who is learning to be scared and vulnerable and uncertain the same way I had been scared and vulnerable and uncertain my whole life. The building itself started to change, too. I renovated the front half and opened a small cafe and workshop space, places where artists and craftspeople could work alongside the salvaged pieces of history that were my life's work. It became a gathering place, a community, something bigger than just a dusty warehouse full of old wood. And it occurred to me one day, standing in the middle of it with the afternoon light pouring through those high windows, that this was what my grandmother had been trying to pass down to me all along. Not just a piece of property, not just a business, but the permission to build something of my own, to create a space where I could be the person I'd always been trying to become. I still have the letter. I keep it in a box on my nightstand, and sometimes I take it out and read it again, not because I need the information, but because I need the reminder. The reminder that someone saw me, even when I couldn't see myself. The reminder that there is power in staying, in holding on to what others would throw away, in keeping alive the pieces of the past that still have something to teach us. My mother's last words to me were the key, and I thought for so long that she was talking about a physical key, some artifact she'd hidden away. But I understand now that she was talking about something else. She was handing me the key to my own life, my own identity, my own ability to choose. She was handing me the key to the prison I had built for myself with my own fear and my own need for approval. And it had been in my hand the whole time. My father stopped calling after the dinner. That was his way, the path of least resistance. He couldn't face the woman I had become, the woman who demanded to be seen and heard, the woman who refused to be the caretaker of a family that had never really cared for her. I don't hate him for that. I don't hate anyone anymore. I spent too many years carrying around the weight of that anger, and it was exhausting. What I feel now is something closer to relief. A quiet, steady relief that I no longer need any of them to validate my existence. I don't need Claire to be grateful, or my father to apologize, or my mother's ghost to explain herself. I have everything I need right here in this building, this dusty, beautiful, impossible building that has been home to more lives than I will ever fully know. And I'm still the one who stays. That hasn't changed, but I stay on my own terms now. I stay because I want to, not because I'm waiting for someone else to tell me I'm allowed to leave. I stay because the work of keeping something alive is its own kind of reward, and I've learned that there's no shame in being the one who holds the things that nobody else remembers. There's a kind of grace in it, a kind of victory. The world tells you that the ones who leave are the ones who matter, the ones who move on, the ones who climb the mountain and leave the rest of us in the valley. But the world is wrong about a lot of things. The people who stay, the ones who keep the fire burning, the ones who remember the names of the dead and the stories of the buildings and the weight of a life that has been lived fully. Those are the people who build the foundation for everything else. And I'm proud to be one of them. I'm not looking for applause, and I'm not waiting for the last laugh. I've already had it. It happened the day I realized that the only person who needed to believe in me was myself. It happened the day I stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped pretending that the approval of people who had never truly seen me was something I needed to live. It happened the day I opened a letter I'd been too afraid to open and found the truth of who I really was waiting on the other side. So here's what I want you to take from this, if you're still with me. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who held it together, the one who showed up when nobody else did, you're not the afterthought. You're the anchor. You're the one who makes everything else possible, even if nobody ever says it out loud. You don't need the applause. You don't need the recognition. You just need to know that your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's ability to see it. It's already there, inside you, waiting for you to claim it. And once you claim it, nobody can ever take it away. My grandmother knew that. She wrote it down in a letter, and she sent it to me because she knew I was the one who would understand. And I do understand now. I understand it in my bones, in the dust that gets in my lungs, in the calluses on my hands, in the quiet satisfaction of a door that swings perfectly on its hinges because I took the time to hang it right. I understand that the things we inherit are not always the things we think they are. Sometimes they're just the strength we never knew we had. The violet on my windowsill is blooming again. That's not the right flower, I know. But there's a plant my grandmother had in her kitchen, a spider plant she'd had for 40 years, and I have one of its descendants now, sitting in the same window where I can see it every morning. It's a small thing, but it reminds me that some things survive even when everything else falls apart. It reminds me that there's a kind of resilience that doesn't shout, that doesn't demand attention, that just quietly keeps going, putting out new leaves, sending out runners, refusing to die. That's the inheritance I'm passing down to my niece, who comes to the workshop on Saturdays now, who has started calling me Aunt Eliza in a way that sounds like she actually means it. I don't have a daughter of my own, but I have her, and I have the building, and I have the community of people who have found their way into this space and made it their own. And I have the memory of a woman who saw me when nobody else did, who left me a letter that changed my life, who taught me that the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth about who they really are. So, I'm writing this down, not for anyone in particular, just for whoever needs to hear it. If you're in a room right now where nobody sees you, where you're the helper, the caretaker, the one who stays while everyone else leaves, don't wait for them to turn around. Don't wait for them to finally notice you. Turn around yourself. Look at the thing you've been building, the life you've been creating, the strength you've been accumulating in the silence. That's real. That's yours. And it's more than enough. My name is Eliza Rains, and I'm the one who stayed. And I wouldn't have it any other way.